Hello students, welcome to video lesson 9.6b. In this video we're going to talk about some ways that we can help ourselves along in the process of solving quadratic equations, okay? And most of this is going to be based on the discriminant. Okay? And the discriminant is a specific piece of the quadratic formula that we looked at in our last video that allows us to determine not only how many solutions our quadratic equation has, options 0, 1, or 2, but it also allows us to decide or determine if the equation is in fact factorable either with the window method or with the just regular factoring method, okay? So the discriminant is the expression that's underneath the radical symbol in our quadratic formula, okay? So b squared minus 4ac, that stuff that's underneath the radical symbol, that is called the discriminant, okay? Now, we don't need the square root part. So the discriminant formula is literally just b squared minus 4 times a times c. And again, those a, b, and c values are coming from whatever quadratic equation we are looking at, okay? So here's the basic premise of the discriminant. If we calculate the discriminant of a quadratic equation, if that discriminant is a positive number, okay, if the discriminant is bigger than 0, i.e. a positive number, then there are two solutions to that quadratic equation, okay? And we can go ahead and use the quadratic formula to find those two equations, all right? So if b squared minus 4ac, that discriminant formula, is bigger than 0, there are two solutions. If that discriminant formula is exactly 0, then there is one solution, okay? There's one solution. So if that is 0, then there's one real number solution, okay? And if that expression is negative or less than 0, there are no real solutions, okay? And that's exactly what we would write, no real solutions, 0 solutions. So just by calculating that discriminant, doing b squared minus 4ac, we can calculate or figure out before we actually solve the equation, how many solutions are we actually looking for, okay? So as an example, if we look at this particular equation here, 2x squared minus 3x is equal to negative 5. They want us to find how many solutions does it have, okay? So the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to make it in standard form. We're going to rearrange the equation so that it is in standard form, meaning it is equal to 0, and we've got the three pieces all on that left side of the equation, okay? So in order to get this side to equal 0, I need to get rid of a minus 5, get rid of a negative 5. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add 5 to both sides of the equation. It's going to cancel that out and become 0. This side, the 5 doesn't get to add to anything. It's just going to show up at the end of the equation, 3x plus 5. So I get this equation now, okay? 2x squared minus 3x plus 5 is equal to 0. And now I can identify my a, my b, and my c, and I can calculate the discriminant. So a in this case is 2, b is a negative 3, and c is a 5. So when I calculate my discriminant then, b squared is going to be negative 3 squared minus 4 times 2 times 5. So let's see, negative 3 squared is 9. Minus 4 times 2 is 8. 8 times 5 is 40. So I end up here with negative 31. So that's the value of my discriminant. What does that tell me about this particular equation? Well, it tells me that there are no real solutions. So instead of having to go through setting up the entire quadratic formula or trying to factor with the window method or anything like that, we just calculate our discriminant which again, b squared minus 4 times a times c. And we discovered that it has no real solutions to begin with, okay? Now, if I calculate the discriminant of, let's say, this equation, let's say I do 3x squared plus, let's say, 10x plus 8, okay, equals 0. I've already written it in standard form for us. If I calculate the discriminant of this particular quadratic equation, again, I need to identify my a, b, and c, and this will tell me, okay, a is 3, b is 10, c is 8. So when I calculate the discriminant, I have to do 10 squared minus 4 times 3 times 8. Well, 10 squared is 100, minus 4 times 3 is 12, 12 times 8. 12 times 8, I think, is 96. Right? 100 minus 96 is 4. So I have a positive number. So I know for sure that I'm going to have two solutions. Okay, now, the other interesting thing that the discriminant allows us to do is if we look at the discriminant and it is a number, a positive number that we can take the square root of very nicely, then we know that the equation that we started with is factorable. We can factor it, okay? So if you don't like the whole quadratic formula with the plus minus business, you can always use this discriminant just as a check, b squared minus 4ac, to see, can I factor this equation? So the question becomes, can you take the square root of 4 very nicely? Do we know what the square root of 4 is? Well, yes, we do. It's 2. You could do it on a calculator. It comes out very nicely. So what that means is we could then factor this quadratic equation. Now, we would have to use the window method to factor, right? So if you are not super comfortable with the window method or don't like it very much, you may still choose to do the quadratic formula, which is perfectly fine. You're always allowed to do that. But we certainly could do the window method here. 3x squared, 8, multiply those together, that's 24. Numbers that multiply to 24 and add up to 10 would be 6 and 4. We can find our greatest common factors, 3x and a 4, just 1x and a 2. So we get 3x plus 4, x plus 2 is equal to 0. And then we could continue solving from there with the zero product property, right? So those are the two things that the discriminant allows us to determine before we get into the meat of the problem, okay? We can do the discriminant, b squared minus 4 times a times c, and it will tell us how many solutions are there, and can we factor the original equation, okay? If it is a positive number, there are two solutions. If that positive number is something you can square root, then you can solve by factoring. If the discriminant is negative, there are no solutions. If the discriminant happens to equal 0 exactly, there is just one real solution, okay? So the quadratic formula, as I mentioned in our last video, is sort of our foolproof method for solving quadratic equations. But we did talk in this chapter about two other types, or I guess I should say strategies, to solve quadratic equations. That would be square roots and solving by factoring, which does include the window method, okay? So the quadratic formula, we sort of skipped over these other two, but the quadratic formula is something you can use all the time. But if it is a factorable equation, for example, if we had, let's say, x squared plus 5x plus 6 equals 0. Well, this equation we can factor by finding two numbers that multiply to make 6 and add up to make 5. Those numbers would be 2 and 3. X plus 2, x plus 3. Set each of those to 0, right? X plus 2 equals 0. X plus 3 equals 0. And we can solve from there. X equals -2, x equals -3. So if you can factor the equation easily, particularly without the window method, that is the easiest way in my opinion, to solve the quadratic equation. Okay, the quadratic formula will still get you exactly the same two answers. Okay, so you can always use the quadratic formula. It will give you the same answers, as I said. So, but like I said, I do think factoring can be easier. The square roots type of equation, that's one where we only see the x show up one time. It's something like 3x squared minus what? 3x squared minus 27 is equal to 0. So here the x only shows up one time. So we can go ahead and solve this just by getting the x alone. 3x squared is equal to 27. Divide by 3. X squared is equal to 9. And then we can square root both sides. So solve for square roots use if the equation has no x term, meaning the x only shows up one time, right? It's just x squared. There's no x in the equation. We can use factoring if the equation can be factored easily. Okay, and then foolproof method is the quadratic formula. Negative b, or the opposite of b, plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4 times a times c, all of that math divided by 2 times a. Okay. If you have any questions about solving quadratic equations using any of these methods, square roots, factoring the equation, quadratic formula, do please reach out to me. Let me help you. Let me explain before we have to sort of show what we know about this on a quiz. If you don't have any questions, that's great, and we'll talk to you soon.